Will we see the first female FIA World Champion crowned in the coming years? Nope. Will we see the first female FIA World Champion defend her title on the streets of Monaco in the coming years? Nope. Why? It's not because I've become a raging chauvinist. I'm just stating a fact. The reason these statements are true is that it's already happened. Her name is Susanna Raganelli, and she was the 1966 World Karting Champion. While I don't like to reference F1 drivers when celebrating someone's achievements, it seems necessary to add to this perceived credibility for those unfamiliar with the great sport of karting. So if you don't know about her, here are a couple of names you'll recognise. She beat Keke Rosberg and Ronnie Peterson. Now, if you're like me, you'll appreciate that the real achievement wasn't just beating Peterson, who was one of the pre-event favourites for the World Championship in 1966, but she also bested the likes of Mickey Allen, Guido Sala, Goldstein, Pernagotti, and many more. And as we'll see, no one really came close to her at that 1966 World Championship, much to the frustration of Karting magazine at the time. The reason I find this important, and why I've written about Raganelli so often, is that I'm utterly baffled by the lack of attention her achievement receives in motorsport. She was the first and remains the only female world champion in an FIA accredited world championship, yet you'll hardly see her mentioned anywhere. Karting does a terrible job of celebrating its history, often foolishly using F1 drivers as measures of relevance and success. It's as if she never existed. She disappeared from karting after 1967, and aside from racing in the 1975 Monaco Ladies race, which supported the F1 event, it's difficult to track down what she did afterward. Hopefully she continues to live an incredible life, and I would understand if she wanted to avoid attention, especially given what was written about her in 1966 by the British press. But the near total blackout of her success, which involved winning many major events in front of thousands of people, many of whom were ecstatic Italians, is downright bizarre. While Susie's World Championship remains the only one won by a woman, success in karting for women isn't particularly rare. I could list an enormous number of top female drivers: Mary Hicks, Val Nixon, Charlotte Hellberg, Sophie Kumpfen, Ella Stevens, Lorraine Peck, Jeanette Peake, Kathy Muller. This is just to name but a few. The cliche that everyone is the same with the helmet on is a well-trodden one, but it's true. I don't want this to be a "look, a woman won" piece. The story itself is packed with enough drama that it's worth telling in its own right. So let's dive into Susie's story and give it the attention it finally deserves. If the rest of the motorsport world won't, I will. What we know about her actual racing is largely filtered through the lens of the British media, who weren't her biggest fans, but march forward we shall. Daughter of Targa Florio competitor and Alfa Romeo dealer Susanna Raganelli, Susanna was born in 1947. She's arguably more famous for being the first Italian owner of a Stradale 33 than actually winning the karting world championship. Her mechanic was a certain Franco Baroni, and she ran Techno chassis with Perilla engines. In 1965, she took the karting world by storm, and this is that story. Introduction to Susie, the Crafty one, European Team Championship 1965. This round was held in the Swiss town of Vevey. Quite an astonishing location for a kart race. Historic buildings nestled next to Lake Geneva with an incredible landscape surrounding it. Thousands of spectators line the circuit, some even climbing trees to get a better view. The European Championship in the 60s worked differently than it does today. International karting was made up of national teams, and the European Championship crowned countries as winners, not individual drivers, as was the case with the World Karting Championship. Each country would nominate 4 drivers to compete for the title. And it was the Italians who swept to victory, led by reigning world champion Guido Sala. But Susie in particular caught the eye of a British team member who described her as crafty due to her tactics in one of the races. In one of her heats, Susie slowed the field down so much that several competitors oiled up. The Italian team's technical know-how was on full display here. Their carburetors could handle the slow speeds, and as soon as Susie accelerated, she left most of the field behind. If you're unfamiliar with the 100cc two-strokes used in karting, let me tell you, they really don't like going very slow. A close battle ensued in the race, however, with British legend Mickey Allen, but despite appearing a tad bit quicker, he couldn't get past her. Karting magazine noted that a prerequisite for being on the Italian team was being able to restart your kart if needed. This led to an increased focus on low-speed carburetor tuning. Whether any of that is entirely true, who knows. In the final, Raganelli finished second behind her teammate Constantini, with Peterson in third. The Italians were the overall team winners. If there had been any doubts, Susie and the Italians made it clear they meant business, and she had certainly caught the attention of observers. Round 2, held at Leidschendam in Holland, was won by Belgium, with Italy finishing second. Once again, Raganelli was at the front, battling for victories in all her heats. In the first heat, she lost out to British driver Buzz Ware on the last lap. In the second heat, Ware spun out while chasing her and she claimed the win. In the third heat, teammate Eleonori supposedly held back the chasing group, allowing Raganelli to secure another victory. The final was won by Guido Sala, with Raganelli finishing 26th. Most likely due to a retirement and engine failure. Belgium left the event as overall winners, but Italy retained the championship lead going into the next round at Villa Coublé, where the Italians would ultimately be crowned the champions. The talented Italian girl, the European Team Championship 1966. What a sight it must have been, as Raganelli crossed the finish line at the first round of the European Championship at Vevey, taking the final race win. La Susie was greeted with such a popular victory that police had to use batons to hold back thousands of Italians who were celebrating. It's almost incomprehensible for modern karters to even imagine an event with fans, let alone ones with enough enthusiasm to require Vevey's police force to intervene. She didn't qualify on pole for this event. Time qualifying took place over 2 laps back then, not 1. And this honour went to longtime rival Ronnie Peterson, who posted a 1 minute 12 versus her 1 minute 12.3. In words that Karting magazine would later recant somewhat, the talented Italian girl won her first 2 heats. In the second, Mickey Allen put the squeeze on her into the first corner but ended up colliding with the hay bales and losing several positions. The third heat saw Brit Bobby Day get into the front at the start and managed to keep her behind, which given Susie's usual dominance was a pretty impressive achievement. With Peterson winning all his heats, the stage was set for a proper old school showdown. At the start, the pair got away cleanly. Back then, races were long. 40-50 lap finals were the norm, and as the race wore on, Peterson reportedly tired and had to concede to Susie. La Susie won for Italy and the Italian crowd went wild. Round 2 was held in the market square of Lisson in Italy and within walking distance of the Monza Grand Prix circuit. Qualifying was close, with Peterson on pole with a 1 minute 26.8. Raganelli was back in 4th, about 2 tenths off Peterson's pace. Raganelli finished behind Pernigotti in her first heat as the Italian team cemented their dominance. After some initials at the start, where officials thought Pernigotti was starting too fast, the second heat became more eventful. Once again, Raganelli was behind Pernigotti, but started bumping him in some corners. Out of frustration or fun, who knows, but it alarmed Gordo Sala, the team manager, enough that he signalled her to back off, which she did. By this point, Pernigotti had let her through, but she dutifully allowed him to retake the position. Poleman Peterson won all his heats and was the man to beat. In the final, Peterson continued his dominant form, with Pernigotti second and Raganelli third. The Italian team accumulated enough points throughout the meeting, Peterson being the sole Swede in the top 6 versus 4 Italians, to win the overall and maintain their championship lead. But heading into round 4 at Villa Coublé, France, the Italian team had maintained their commanding lead in the championship. In Raganelli's first 2 heats, she finished second in both. However, in the third heat, she crashed with Bajus and Peterson. The track was very hazardous due to greasy and wet conditions that plagued the meeting. The final was won by Stalduin, with Goldstein second and Eggstrom third. Raganelli spun out of the final, but Italy had such a commanding lead in the championship that it didn't matter. They were once again European Team Champions. Pure Domination, the 1966 World Karting Championship. Banned women drivers from karting was not the statement I expected to read in the subheadline of Karting magazine's report from the 1966 World Karting Championship at a kart circuit near Copenhagen in Denmark. The statement was followed by, "If having them means giving them special treatment to the detriment of the sport." Oh boy, this was not how I thought this was going to go when I was researching this. My source, Karting magazine, was somewhat biased, it appears. I had been aware of the infamous Down with Susie's Knickers t-shirts worn in the paddock by a rival engine manufacturer, which must have been awful to witness, but this was a shock. I'd hoped to write in detail about the 1966 World Championship, but now I must navigate this with a bit more care. The issue lay in the fact that Raganelli utterly demolished everyone by a significant margin. The reason? Well, according to Karting magazine, it was because she had a huge power advantage. Sure, they felt she courted favour with the officials, which was the reason for the ban suggestion, but the annoyance seemed to be more to do with the perceived mechanical advantage, something that they had never actually mentioned in the 2 prior years of reporting, from what I can gather. It's become increasingly common for me to have to remind people that karting, at the elite level, isn't a single make spec sport. It's development focused. That means multiple engine manufacturers competing to outdo each other. Getting a good engine is part of the game. If you can't get one, do better. Karting magazine's attitude betrayed the spirit of competition. This was only a year after Jim Clark and Lotus completely dominated F1, but I don't recall many of the same accusations being aimed at him. The 1966 World Championship was open to non-homologated engines, allowing for substantial development opportunities, yet only Comet brought something new. Suspicions of twin-cylinder engines were unfounded. The Pirelli GP15Ls were so dominant that Comet had to try to improve upon the K77. Details of their development were scarce, and it didn't matter in the end as Bruno Garner's Comets weren't able to overhaul the Pirillas. The criticism that Raganelli had the best engine was absurd. This is motorsport. Every driver is trying to get the best engine possible. It's part of the game. Criticising her for that is like criticising Jim Clark or Graham Hill for having the best car with Lotus in the same era. It's just silly. I'm all for examining whether any driver receives unfair favours, but Karting Magazine's editor seemed to drown his valid points in personal bias. Raganelli was simply a pioneer of modern karting, with her team doing everything right. In time practice, Raganelli posted a 1 minute 5.1, half a second faster than Heisman's 1 minute 5.6, who was second. The marker was set, and Raganelli had already shown her dominance. This was a demolition job. Karting Magazine soon started mentioning Raganelli's power advantage, likely fueled by the struggling Brits. The fastest British driver, Mickey Allen, was back in 17th, 1.1 seconds off her time. Now, the heats became quite chaotic. In one, a Dutch team manager stormed onto the track inside a corner and tried to grab a driver he believed was unfairly blocking his own driver. In a later heat, things became even more bizarre when an ambulance entered the live track. Sala, the reigning champion, had tried a risky move and was thrown from his car. Before he even hit the ground, the ambulance was speeding through the track, bewildering all the karters who had to avoid driving into a car circulating on the circuit. What about her rivals? Ronnie Peterson, the favourite for the title, like Sala, spun out from one of his heats while leading, severely denting his hopes for a good grid position in the first final. Pernagotti, another title contender, was caught in a major pile-up as well. Engström, who qualified third, was the only driver to provide any real threat to Raganelli. A relative unknown before the event, he excelled through the heats and into the finals. Raganelli won all her heats, but not without annoying Karting Magazine again. In the first heat, Kai Lundberg tried to move around the outside of Raganelli but ended up in the tyre wall. According to Karting Magazine, the nonsense that had been building in the European round, though not much reference to this exists in the other reports beyond the 1965 European Championship, when the Italians employed very slow rolling up laps. On the rolling lap of one of the heats, Raganelli apparently stopped and her mechanic, presumably Baroni, wiped her visor. She then rejoined the front of the grid and took off. Her competitors were likely frustrated, but it looked like it was within the rules. It showed her and her team were simply ahead of the game. In her final heat, Pernagotti latched onto her, posing a genuine threat. The female Danish contingent cheered for Raganelli during the heat, but the Italian team called off the battle, and Pernagotti fell back. Raganelli would start on pole for the first of the three finals, which would become incrementally longer, with the last being a brutal 50 laps. Disaster seemed to strike as she stopped at the hairpin during the rolling lap of the first final. Leif Engström, her main competitor, couldn't have asked for better luck. But Raganelli got going again and rejoined her starting position. Karting Magazine hinted that allowing the field to roll around again was due to favouritism. It's worth noting that in 1979, Karting Magazine reported that when Senna had a similar issue in one of his finals, the field was held back and he was allowed to change his carburetor. And funnily enough, there wasn't any calls for drivers to be banned. When the final got underway, Engström initially led for about 4 laps before Raganelli took over. Brit Mickey Allen was competitive, threatening Engström for a second, but a puncture took him out of contention. Raganelli won, cruising towards World Championship glory. The second final began similarly, but with Engström holding on to the lead for about 15 laps. Any other year, he'd have been champion, but once again Raganelli was unstoppable. A crash involving Pernagotti, Allen and a few others caused drama, but everyone walked away fine. Raganelli, 2 wins, 2 races. The last final of the day was an endurance test. Raganelli kissed her mother, Baroni checked the car, and everyone waited. Classic Raganelli mind games, much to Karting Magazine's annoyance again. Once again, Engström led from the start, but this time Raganelli passed him on lap 1. She won the final by about 30 yards. Mickey Allen impressed with a superb drive from 15th to 5th. Susie Raganelli was the 1966 World Karting Champion. Despite her incredible and undeniable success winning the World Championship, in addition to her European and Italian National Championship victories, Karting Magazine no longer called her the talented Italian girl, but dismissed her driving as not expert, effectively attributing it to daddy's money. Their biggest grievance wasn't her lack of ability, but the irritating manifestations connected with her being a girl. Nothing she did was technically illegal, but they followed their regrettable words with, "If this is what happens to karting when women race, then we would rather they be banned and the sport return to what it was intended to be." What karting was intended to be, I'm not sure, but Raganelli and her team destroyed the competition, and these unfortunate comments were thankfully met with well-deserved criticism. A letter and the infamous Down with Susie's Knickers t-shirt. Mr. Simon Melrose of South West London accused Karting magazine of sour grapes. Melrose pointed out that accusations about Raganelli having the best equipment were not levied against the British drivers who could afford the best engines in their respective national competitions. He further argued that the comments about her father's wealth misrepresented her skill, as the British drivers had the best motors Comet could supply. As Melrose noted, the tactics Raganelli employed were standard psychological preparation for competition, and drivers should not be in a position where these kind of strategies affect their performance. He concluded by stating that this World Championship would harm the British reputation and requested an apology from what was otherwise an excellent magazine. Well, Karting magazine didn't issue a direct apology in response to the letter in the issue. They published an image of an individual wearing a Down with Susie's Knickers t-shirt, which was available to buy. Yes, they really did that, and yes, it is horrifying. Raganelli did appear as top billing under the Roll of Honour in 1967's Going Racing by Alan Burgess, however. Whether this was a conciliatory moment, I'm not sure, but one hopes so. Nearly a two-time champion, the 1967 World Championship title defence. Raganelli probably should have been a double world champion, given her dominance in the opening round of the 1967 World Karting Championship, which was now spread over 3 rounds instead of one weekend with 3 finals. The championship kicked off in the regular venue of Vevey, and Susie picked up right where she left off after the 1966 World Karting Championship. However, Karting magazine didn't hold back its grievances with the organisation of international competition, calling the event a Swiss farce, and accusing the organisers of black flagging British driver Mickey Allen to allow a Swiss driver to secure P2. They also reignited their frustration with the 66 championship, stating that every time Raganelli got a bad start, the race was restarted. It seemed they hadn't let go. In time practice, Raganelli logged a 1 minute 13.48, nearly a second faster than future champion Thomas Nielsen, who posted a 1 minute 14.3. Peterson was third with a 1 minute 14.46. Once again, Raganelli was in a league of her own. She won her first heat by 60 yards. In her second heat, she dropped Paul Fletcher, Paul Nagotti, Allen and Peterson, dominating the race, and the same happened in the third heat. She once again was untouchable. There's surprisingly little written about Raganelli's final win at Vevey, likely due to her sheer dominance. She won the 39-lap race with ease, while most of the action took place behind her. Peterson crashed, and Mickey Allen was black flagged for allegedly blocking Swiss driver Daniel Cabaz, according to Karting magazine. Pernagotti rounded out the podium. Leading the championship comfortably, after the first round, Raganelli seemed on course for a second world title. However, this is where her season took a turn. While detailed information is scarce, she had a serious crash during the prestigious Paris 6-hour endurance event. These endurance races, like the UK Snetterton 9-hour and the Shenington 6-hour, were highly regarded at the time. David Salamone, who was a driver for the British team, commented to me and emphasised how dangerous the Paris circuit was, a fact that seemed to catch up with Raganelli. Going into round 2 of the World Championship in Dusseldorf, it was clear from the brief report that Raganelli had lost pace. Whether it was a confidence issue or an injury is uncertain, but given her previous advantage, it's reasonable to suspect the latter. In front of 10,000 spectators, Francois Goldstein took the win. The future multiple world champion was joined on the podium by Rano and Edgardo Rossi, while Raganelli finished back in 6th place. Despite the setback, she still sat in P1 in the overall championship standings with 88 points. Goldstein was close behind with 84 and Corbaz was third with 83, heading into the final round on the streets of Monaco. It was still all up for grabs. Now forgive me for a moment, the idea of karts racing on the streets of Monaco is something that truly captures my imagination. I've never understood the anti-Monaco rhetoric that pervades motorsport. It's a glorious, unique venue that challenges drivers like no other circuit. In 1967, the kart circuit only used a small portion of the famous track, including the main straight and the section past the swimming pool. While it didn't include some of Monaco's most iconic corners, it was still Monaco. However, Karting magazine labelled the circuit dangerous with 2 diabolical hairpins. Harsh maybe, but it's still Monaco. At least it wasn't a circuit on a field in the middle of nowhere. As with many karting events of the 60s, this was far from a simple event. Fights, brawls, tears, police intervention and crashes were the order of the day. Karting wasn't boring back then, that's for sure. By the end of the practice, the Swedish manager had already gotten into a scrap with one of his team members, setting the tone for the rest of the meeting. The 1964 and 65 world champion Guido Sala put it on pole with a 37.48. Raganelli was back in 25th with a 39.4. This was a disaster for her. Coming into the event as the championship leader, a decent weekend in line with her early season form would have secured her a title. But something was clearly wrong. The Italian team had to pivot to their next hope, Pernagotti, who is sitting outside the top 5 in the championship. but was now their only realistic chance for title glory. Raganelli's first heat was a disaster as she ended up in the hay bales on the rolling lap, causing an ambulance to be called. She was okay and bravely continued to race, finishing 22nd. Her second heat saw a slight improvement with a 19th place finish. In the final heat, she jumped up to 9th place, but Karting Magazine continued to criticise her, claiming she came in tearful after each heat and was consoled by her mother. They mocked the delay before the third heat, stating, "Out comes the mirror, and upon close inspection, minor repairs were deemed necessary. Eyeshadow was applied, visor cleaned, helmet polished, mechanics dismissed, and at last she was ready and the race got underway." Once again, Karting Magazine with unfair criticism, and bizarre at that. Due to her poor heat results, Raganelli didn't automatically qualify for the final and had to go through the B final. This race was eventful, to say the least. A Danish driver came to blows with Berta of Monaco, and a few laps later, Berta reportedly drove another driver, Forst, off into the bales. A mob of spectators screamed for justice, and 4 police had to guard Berta for the rest of the event, from which he was eventually disqualified. In midst of all the chaos, Rossi won the race and Raganelli finished 3rd, securing her spot in the final. The final was no less chaotic, and as I was told by Kees van der Grint, Rossi changed his overalls to not stand out, to be targeted. As was typical of the time, team tactics were in full force. Pernigotti, Italy's last hope for the title, had the full support of his teammates, while Goldstein had his Belgian allies. The first attempt at a start saw Pernigotti drive off into the distance, but a race stoppage for unknown reasons led to a restart. Pernigotti led again after the restart, but chaos soon unfolded. Corbaz had a major crash, badly injuring himself. Goldstein also crashed, but managed to restart, though with a bent steering column. Reports from the event are limited somewhat, but disaster struck for the Italian team. Pernigotti crashed out, reportedly with his teammates who were supposed to be protecting him. The points listed him as finishing 5th, but it wasn't enough. In the end, the unexpected happened. Edgardo Rossi, who had to go through the B final, remember, clinched the championship with an 8th place finish in the final. Combined with his 3rd in Dusseldorf and 5th in Vevey, it was enough for him to be crowned champion. Karting Magazine criticised the multi-round championship as turning the whole thing into a lottery, but I believe Rossi was a deserving champion. He did what he needed to do while others faltered. Raganelli finished 23rd. Had she finished nearer the top 10, she would have been champion, and a 2-time champion at that. What could have been? Bob Smythe, Karting Magazine's reporter for the Monaco event, couldn't resist taking one last jab at Susie, stating that she showed contempt by not attending the prize-giving ceremony, which took place in the presence of Princess Grace. I couldn't blame her. She just lost the World Championship. I probably wouldn't hang around either. What exactly happened to Raganelli's performance after the Paris 6-hour crash remains unknown. Was she driving injured? It seems that was the most likely explanation. But either way, she was clearly shaken by what had transpired. In normal circumstances, she would have been double world champion. What happened after? Little is known about Raganelli's racing endeavours after her karting career. In 1967, she toured South Africa with David Salamone and Bruno Ferrari. She was later invited to compete in the 1975 Monaco Ladies Race, a support event at the Formula 1 Grand Prix, using Renault 5s, which was won by Marie-Claude Beaumont. It's possible that she raced some Alphas, but I have no definitive confirmation of that. It's also said that she managed her husband Giancarlo Nadeo's career in Formula 2 and Formula 3, but one thing is for certain, she never returned to the limelight. Several Alfa Romeo Stradale 33 devotees and motoring journalists have attempted to find her over the years, but as I've mentioned before, if someone like Raganelli wants to remain out of the spotlight, she will. And who can blame her? The British karting media's coverage of her success was neither kind nor fair, and to be quite frankful, it was disgraceful. Susanna Raganelli is a karting legend. A story that I've really only scratched the surface of. Much of what's been recounted here is viewed through the lens of the British karting media, and I am certain there's more to her karting journey than we have yet to discover. Why she isn't more widely celebrated in the modern era is a mystery, but to me, and to many others in the sport, she stands among the karting greats.